Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Von Manor and Mythos Monday. Roger and I have returned for Mythos Monday, which we haven't done for a while. We haven't done an episode devoted to H.P. Lovecraft in some time, but I thought I would do one today. We're going to be talking about the complete fiction of H.P. Lovecraft and why would one read the complete fiction of H.P. Lovecraft anyway? Why read everything? Not all of his stories were great. There were a few that were, kind of bad. So why read them? Why read everything? Well, I think it's a valuable thing to do, reading all of H.P. Lovecraft's fiction, if you are interested in horror fiction, the history of horror fiction, the development of horror fiction, and this author in particular. Because H.P. Lovecraft, he was the most important horror writer of the 20th century. He is certainly one of the most influential horror writers of all time. And so if you're interested in horror, H.P. Lovecraft, you have to at least acknowledge H.P. Lovecraft and his work, his contribution to this genre. But still, even so, why read it all? This is something I'm going to be doing in December. I'm going to be, it's Dunwich December in Dunwich this year, where for the holidays and around the holidays, I'll be reading every single H.P. Lovecraft story, including his revision work, the revision work he did with 4 other clients, which very often was just somebody giving him a plot and then he would write the story. So in his revisions, some of those revisions are mostly Lovecraft. And so, yeah, I'm going to be reading it all. Why would I do such a thing? I've done it before, of course, but it's been a while. I haven't really sat down and read Lovecraft since I started this channel. And what was that, Roger? 3 years ago? 3.5 years? I can't even remember. It's been a while. It's been a while since I've been doing this, and so it's been a while since I've sat down and read Lovecraft. And it's been longer since I've read all of Lovecraft. It's been a number of years. But I'm going to do it once again, and I think it's a valuable thing to do if you are interested in horror and this author. But why? Well, first, I'll talk about how I'm going to be doing it. So I was thinking of, out of pure nostalgia, I was thinking of reading Lovecraft again in the Arkham House editions, which is this is how I read all of Lovecraft for the first time. The first time I read Lovecraft was in a paperback, mass market paperback titled The Tomb and Other Stories, maybe, something like that. And, it was a selection of some of his earlier stories. I was very interested in H.P. Lovecraft after I first read his work. And my stepfather bought me these when I was young. And he bought me the first 3, and then later on I picked this up, I think. But the problem with these is that they do not present H.P. Lovecraft's fiction in the order that he wrote them. And if you're going to be reading all of H.P. Lovecraft's fiction, that's the way you want to read it. Because if you read it that way, you really see how he developed as an author over time. And very often it's valuable when you're very intrigued by an author, when you find an author particularly fascinating, to read all of their work, just to see how they changed and developed over time. Now, this is an easy thing to do with H.P. Lovecraft because he didn't write that much as far as fiction is concerned. It fits in 4 books, basically. Or if you don't count the revisions, it could fit in 1 book. There's the really nice Barnes & Noble edition, for example, which I have up there. There are a few pretty good complete H.P. Lovecraft fiction books out there. But the edition that I'm going to go with is this one from Hippocampus Press. This is the Ver Aurum edition from Hippocampus Press, which they published a few years ago, 2015, I want to say this edition came out. Let me see. Yeah, 2015. Doesn't seem that long ago, but I guess it was. This is a very nice set of books from Hippocampus Press. Originally came out in hardcover at the first 3 volumes. Unfortunately, the revision volume, for some reason, came out in paperback. And I've been hearing that they are going to be coming out with a hardcover edition of this, but maybe they will. I don't know. Unfortunately, it's, at the moment at least, as far as I'm aware, let me know if I'm wrong, but as far as I'm aware, this is still only available in paperback. And I think they might have a second edition of that out now, actually. But anyway, yeah, that's how I'm going to read it. Because it is interesting to see H.P. Lovecraft's development as a writer and how he changed over time. How he became the writer that was the writer that has been so influential on horror fiction. The first story in this, and in most editions of H.P. Lovecraft's complete fiction, is going to be The Beast in the Cave, I want to say. Let me see. Yeah, The Beast in the Cave. Usually that's going to be the first story in editions like this, which was a story he wrote when he was very young. He was a teenager when he wrote that. And then it goes on from there through all the stories in his career. But he changed a lot as a writer over time. One thing about Lovecraft, he did write a ton. He didn't just write fiction. He wrote thousands of letters. He wrote travel logs. He wrote all kinds of stuff. And he wrote a lot of poetry, which I am not going to subject myself to all of H.P. Lovecraft's poetry. No. But the fiction, yeah, I'll read all of that. And it's interesting to see his development because you can clearly see his early influences. His favorite writer of all time, appropriately enough, was Edgar Allan Poe. Certainly in The Beast in the Cave, you see a lot of Poe, and a lot of his earlier stories you do. Even though he was very interested in Poe, and Poe was a heavy influence on his early work, all of his work still was Lovecraft. His personality was such that it came through in all of his stories, even when you could tell he was clearly influenced by another writer. Edgar Allan Poe was the main influence when he was younger. A lot of his earlier stories are influenced by Lord Dunsany, who wrote such wonderful fantasy stories. H.P. Lovecraft wrote a lot of fantasy. Tended to be creepy fantasy. But he wrote a lot of fantasy stories that you'll find, in this volume here. This is his early years. This is 1905 through 1925, this volume. These volumes have all of the corrected texts from S.T. Joshi. S.T. Joshi, the preeminent H.P. Lovecraft scholar, went through all of H.P. Lovecraft's texts and corrected them because, H.P. Lovecraft, most of his early work was published in pulp magazines. And there were a lot of errors that crept into his work when they were originally published. And those errors just continued on into paperback editions, into the early Arkham House editions. Also, sometimes editors for certain magazines would deliberately change things. At the Mountains of Madness is a story that was heavily changed. And Lovecraft was not happy about that. And so S.T. Joshi went back through the original manuscripts, the original typescripts, if that was all that was available, and corrected the text to something closer to what H.P. Lovecraft intended. He made another pass at that for these editions. He didn't change too much more for these editions. So these aren't something that you need to have. But this is Joshi's last word on the subject of H.P. Lovecraft's texts. And the important thing about this is that this will tell you all of the changes that Joshi made and all of the different versions, all the changes through all of the different major H.P. Lovecraft publications over the years. So this is a valuable edition to have. I'm not reading it for that, though. I'm just reading it because, you know, these are really nice editions of H.P. Lovecraft stories. So I figured this is a nice way to read it. And it is interesting because in these earlier stories, first of all, if you've never come across H.P. Lovecraft at all, you might think this wouldn't be the best place to start because a lot of these stories are not his best. These were some of his earlier stories. His best work came later. His best work started around the time that he wrote The Call of Cthulhu and the Cthulhu mythos that came after that. So maybe if you've never read H.P. Lovecraft before, that would be a better place to start. But still, I think this is an interesting place to start because this is actually how I started, was reading H.P. Lovecraft's earlier stories. The first stories I read, like I said, were in that paperback edition of The Tomb. But this is interesting because we've got his earlier stories, which are tended to be much shorter, influenced by Dunsany and Edgar Allan Poe. He was developing his own voice in these stories. Eventually, he became more confident as a writer, more assured as a writer. His style underwent a bit of a change as he continued writing. This is the second volume, 1926 to 1930. Lovely covers, very shiny, but lovely. And then he started to write much longer stories. And his style, you know, Lovecraft catches a lot of heat for his style. But his style became much more restrained over time, actually. He became the master of his style, really. And he used his style to create the atmosphere of horror that he was trying to come across in his work. And I think he does a really wonderful job with that. Some of his more verbose and bombastic stuff came earlier. And later on, he became much more controlled. He started describing his monsters in great detail. No longer were they just unnameable, unmentionable, indescribable horrors. He ended up describing them pretty thoroughly. And by the end of his career, this is the last volume, this is 1931 to 36. By the end of his career, he was a great writer. He just was. I know people hate to admit that, but not only was he influential, I think he was just a really great writer because he was able to create an entire world of horror fiction, a whole universe he created in a relatively, you know, small amount of work. He like I said, he didn't write a ton of fiction. But what he did write was just so, you know, it has become just so influential, and it's just so great and just so creepy. And one of the fun things about reading all of the stories is that they are all very interconnected. He will make references to earlier stories, characters from other stories. And that's how the Cthulhu mythos came together. The Cthulhu mythos, which is a term that was coined by August Derleth, after H.P. Lovecraft's death. H.P. Lovecraft never used that term for his stories. Actually, all of his stories, his dream stories, his Arkham cycle, all of that stuff, no matter how you title them, they are all interconnected. And that's something that you can see pretty clearly when you read it all in one go, which, like I said, makes it more fun. And he also will bring in characters and, well, he will mention characters and other things from other writers. There are a lot of characters from Robert E. Howard that get mentioned in H.P. Lovecraft because H.P. Lovecraft's universe and Robert E. Howard's universe were the same universe, actually, because, you know, H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard would mention each other's characters and the gods and the monsters that appeared in them in their work. And so that makes it extra fun. But H.P. Lovecraft, like I said, terribly important writer. He's worth taking a close look at if you're interested in horror fiction and the history of horror fiction, as I am. So there you go. I'll shut up now. I will catch you next time.